Alright, so at first, open up the terminal and run the command npm init svelte. So because I have the folder open for the project, you'll just input dot. But if you want to create a new folder for the project, you input the name of the folder that you want to be. So the directory not empty, continue, you say yes. Select the skeleton project and select yes using TypeScript syntax. You choose no additional options, and right after you pick npm install uuid svelte icons. This will install the necessary packages for the project. Finally, you run the command npm i-save dev to make sure this is flagged as a dev dependency at types/uuid. Once that's done, just run the command npm run dev. Once the dev server is up and running, close the terminal. Now let's go to the source folder, and in the lib folder, create a new file called constants. Close it, and let's say export const user id cookie ref is equal to user id. This will be used to reference the cookie name for the user ID. So close this file, make sure to delete the index.ts file, and create a new file called types.ts. And we say export type to do is equal to content is a string, ID is type of string, checked is type boolean, and then we also create a new type called to do list. So we say user ID type string, and we say to do array. So what this is gonna look like is this. So we basically have anything that's a string, so any ID that's a string, and it'll be a to do array that'll be of this type. So now we close this file, and in the lib folder, let's create a new file called todos.ts. Close this, and now we say export const to do list store is equal to writable, and we say to do list, and we just give it an empty object as the initial value. Make sure to flag it as a type that we're importing, and we say export function check to do, and this check to do function will take in a user ID, which is a string, and a to do ID, which is also a string. So we say if the user ID does not exist, we throw a new error. We say user must have a valid ID. Now we say const to do list is equal to get to do list store. Make sure to import the get function from SVELTEKIT, from Svelte. So when we say if, wait, I skipped a step. If we say const user found, so let's try to find the user. We say to do list user ID does not equal to undefined. If we found the user, if we didn't find a user, we throw a new error that says user does not exist. So now we try to find the to do. We say to do found is equal to do list user ID dot find to do. And we say to do dot ID is equal to do ID. And if there was no to do found, we throw a new error. We say that to do of ID to do ID does not exist. Now let's make sure to fix this typo on the first line. And if we validated that the to-do exists and that the user exists, we say to-do list store dot update previous to-do list, and we say const to-do index is equal to previous to-do list dot index of, oh wait, no, we say previous to-do list of user ID dot index of to-do found, and we say previous to-do list user ID, and we say to-do index dot checked is equal to not, and let's copy this object, let's paste it in, and then we just return previous to-do list. So now you can see that we find the to-do, we toggle the checked, and we just return it. So now we just say, and now in this function is finished. Now let's create a new function called export function create to do. We're taking a user ID that is of type string, and we'll also take in a parameter called content, which will be of type string. Now we say if the user ID does not exist, we throw a new error, user does not exist. Now we also say if the length of the content is less than 1, so if it's 0, we throw a new error saying the content must be at least 1 character in length. And now we say const to do, we say checked false. Content, we pass in the content, and we say ID is UUID, but the UUID function does not exist. So we'll go to the top and we'll just say import v4 as UUID from UUID. So the reason we renamed the v4 function as UUID because I don't want to get mixed up because UUID is kind of an abstraction from the actual UUID. Because there are many versions, I picked the v4 for many of the use cases, and I only use v4. So usually I just rename the v4 function to UUID. So now that we have the to-do, we say to-do list store. We update the to-do list store, we say previous to-do list, and we say if the previous to-do list, if the user does not exist in the previous to-do list, we say previous to-do list dot user ID. So we create an empty array, and we say previous to-do list user ID dot push to do, and we also say return previous to-do list. So now we'll create a new function called export function delete to do. It'll take in 2 parameters, a user ID of type string, a to do, and a to do ID of type string. And if the user ID does not exist, as you can see, most of the time we'll just have the same exact validation for all these functions. So if the user ID does not exist, throw a new error, user does not exist. So you say const to do list is equal to get to do list store const user found. This is very similar to the check to do list function. So we say is not equal to undefined. We say if no user was found. We throw new error, user does not exist. No, in this one we say user must have a valid ID. And in this one we say the same thing too. User must have a valid ID. Now we also say, let's find the to-do. So we say const to-do found is equal to-do list, user ID, dot find, and we say to-do dot ID is equal to to-do ID, and we say if the to-do was not found, we say throw new error, to-do of ID of to-do ID not found, we say does not exist. Now we say to-do list store dot update previous to-do list. We say previous to-do list user ID is equal to previous to-do list user ID dot filter. And we say to-do dot ID is equal to to-do ID. And then we just return the previous to-do list. So you can see that we filter out the to-do that doesn't have the to-do ID, and we just return the previous to-do list like it was before. So now let's create the last function. We say export function get to-dos. We take in a user ID, which is a string. Let's make sure to fix this typo. Now we say if the user ID does not exist, and we say throw new error, user must have a valid ID. And we say const result to get to-do list store user ID. And if the result, which is basically we're trying to find the user, so if the user does not exist, we say to-do list store dot update previous to-do list. We just say previous to-do list user ID is equal to this, and just return previous to-do list, and we just return empty array. We return empty array right here, but if the result does exist, we just return result. So you can see either way we return a to-do list array. Let's fix this typo right here. Let's make sure it's not the to-do ID. So we're filtering out all the to-dos that do have the to-do ID as the same. Let's go to the app.d.ts. And because we're going to use hooks for this demo, we're going to say use the locals. It's going to be user ID is of type string. So we say in the root, in the src, not in the routes, we say hooks.server.ts. We create a new function called export const handle. It'll be assigned to an async function, which will take in two parameters. One is an event and one is a resolve. So for now, let's just say return resolve event. What this does is it runs the same function that we have on the server. So if we have any layouts or any pages that we need to render, this resolve function runs it. But as you can see, the locals interface is also in the event.locals. You can see that we have a user ID. But right now we're not populating it. We need to populate it with some data. So we say const user ID is equal to event.cookies.get user ID cookie ref. Now we say if the user ID does not exist, we say const new ID is equal to UID. And the same thing we did in the previous file, we just import before as UID from UUID. And now we say event.cookies.set user ID cookie ref. We say new ID and make sure to leave the HTTP only as false and the path as slash. Because if we set the path to anything else that's not slash, this cookie will only apply to the routes inside of that route. So if we say slash whatever, this cookie will only apply to slash whatever or the children of that route. So let's make sure to add the path as slash. And we also say event.locals.user ID is equal to new ID. So now we say if the user ID does exist, we say event.locals.user ID is equal to user ID. And now we can close this file and we can close the app.d.ts file. Now let's create a new folder called the API folder. So we say API slash. This creates a folder. And inside of this folder, we create another folder called get to dos. And inside of this folder, we create a new file called plusserver.ts. So now we say export const get is of type request handler. And make sure to import it from the ./types instead of the app SVELTEKIT. So we say request handler from $types. We say let's make sure we have two parameters. One of them is params and the other one is locals, the same ones from the locals interface that we created earlier. So we say const result is equal to get to dos. Make sure to import it. And we say locals dot user ID. Make sure to return JSON result. And that's it. If you want to test this out really quickly, you could just open up the terminal, go to localhost, go to /API/get to do /get to dos, and you can see it's a slash. So on the API folder, we create a new folder called create to dos, called create to do. Now we create a new file inside of this folder called plusserver.ts. And instead of a get function, we'll have a post function. So we say export const post. And if you're not sure what the difference between get and post is, get is basically a get request from HTTP from a client that is a request to get some data without you having some external data, for example, a JSON object or an XML object. But post function is when the user posts data to the server and the server has an action according to that data. So we also mark it as a request handler. And we say async locals request. Now we create a new form data object, which will await request dot form data. We say content is equal to form data dot get content. So let's create a try catch block. And now we say if the type of content, if the type of the variable content is not a string, we throw a new error saying that property content must be a string. So now we say create to do locals, a user ID, and the content. Make sure to import create to do. And if this throws an error, we say if instance of error. If the error is an instance of error, so if the error object is of the same class as error, we say error. We give it a code of 500. And we say error.message. Make sure to import the error function. And if it's not of type, and if it's not an instance of the class object, we say 500. Unexpected error occurred while attempting to create to do. So now you can see that I'm not saying, throw error. I'm just calling error the function directly, because in SVELTEKIT, you don't need to throw the errors directly for it to actually throw. So finally, on the bottom where there is no try catch block, we say throw redirect 303, and then we say slash. But for the post functions, for the post requests, we can't really test it out in a web browser. We're gonna have to make a use case in the actual client. We'll do that later. So now for now, close the file. And in the API folder, create a new folder called check to do. And in this folder, create a new folder called to do underscore, called bracket to do underscore index, bracket again. And inside the weird looking folder, create a new file called plus server.ts. Let's create a new export function handler. So we say export const post is of type request handler. Let's make sure to have an async function with two parameters, a locals and params. We create a try catch block. So we say check to do, and we pass in the locals.user ID, and we also pass in the params dot to do index. So now if the error is an instance of error, we throw a new error 500 with an error dot message. Make sure to import the error function. And if it's not, we just throw a new error 500 of unexpected error occurred. Wait, let's make sure to fix this typo. While attempting to create to do. And finally, we just throw a redirect back to 303 slash. Make sure to import the redirect function. Let's close this file. And in the API folder, let's create one last folder called delete to do. In this folder, create a new folder called to do, called the bracket to do underscore index bracket again. Create a new file called plus server.ts. And we say we create a new post handler. So we say request handler. And we assign it to an async function with two parameters. One is the locals and one is the params. So we say try, we try delete to do, and we say locals dot user ID, and we also pass in for the second argument params dot to do index. The params is basically this variable right here. So whenever you see brackets in the file in the folder names in SVELTEKIT, it basically means a dynamic route which can be accessed by the params variable inside any load function or any file in SVELTEKIT. So we say catch error. We say if the error is an instance of error, we throw a new error with a code of 500 with the error.message. Make sure to import error. We throw a new error if it's not an instance of error. Say 500. Say unexpected error occurred while attempting to delete to do. And now we just throw redirect 303. Make sure to import redirect to slash. Close this file. And let's create a new file in the routes folder called plus layout.ts, plus layout.svelte, my bad. And we say for the markup, all we're gonna say is slot. All we're gonna input is a slot element from Svelte. And we're just gonna say style global, and we say body, and let's remove the margin from the body, margin 0. Let's give it a background image of linear gradient 0 degrees, so there's no rotation. We say RGB at 0%, so basically at the top, and then RGB, and we set it at 100%. And now let's also set the height 100%. So basically, we create a linear gradient from down to up, from up to down. So from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen, where the top is the yellow the yellow color and the bottom is this orange gradient. So to see this live, let's go to localhost and let's go to slash. Let's make sure to not set it as percent. Let's make sure to set it as VH. And now you can see that the top is actually orange because look, 0 degrees means that it starts from the bottom, so the 0%, and 100% is the top. So let's close this file and let's create a new file called plus page.ts. So we say export const load. We create a load function, async. Let's get one parameter only, which is going to be the fetch function from SVELTEKIT, which behaves just like the fetch function from the actual JavaScript, but has some extra Svelte magic. So let's make sure this satisfies page load from /$ types. Inside of this function, we create an async function called get to dos. and inside we return to-dos is equal to await get to-dos. Let's create a try catch block inside of the get to-dos function. We say const result is equal to await fetch slash API slash get to-dos. And we say const JSON result, which is going to be a to-do array, is equal to await result dot JSON. Let's make sure to import to do. So if you're going to actually create a real professional application using SVELTEKIT, please, please do not do this. Always validate the types that you get from the fetch functions because that could lead to nasty errors. But for this example, for this simple to-do list, it's safe for us to just say it's just a to-do array. So we say we return the JSON result, and now we say if errors instance of error, we throw error 500, error dot message, and now we throw error 500, unexpected error occurred. Now let's close this file. So now let's go into the plus page.svelte file, delete all the default markdown. Let's create a new script tag with the lang property set to TS. So at first we're going to import the data from the load function, which it sounds counterintuitive, but we say export let data, and we get the data directly from the load function. You can see that the to-dos is a to-do array. We say let input content, we create a new string variable is equal to empty string. We also create a new function, a new asynchronous function called handle create to do, and the event property will be set current target equal to event target and HTML form element. So we say input content. Let's make sure to fix this typo. So we say input content is equal to nothing. We say const data is equal to new form data event dot current target, and then we await a fetch function from slash API slash create dash to do, and we say method post, and we say body data, and finally we just await and validate all. What this function does is it reruns the load function from here. So basically we create a new to do and we load the to-dos again. So now we just say we create a new async function, handle check to do. We create a new ID of string and the event just like this. The event will have a current target of event target and HTML form element. So we say input content is equal to nothing. We say const data is equal to. So instead of reworking, let's just copy this Copy all of this because essentially all these handle functions do the same thing, except they just call different. They just make API calls to different routes. So we say /API check to do. We say ID. So below that, create a final function called handle delete to do. And essentially it will be the same thing, but instead of check to do, it will be delete to do. Now let's get into the actual markup. So we say dot flex wrapper, and we create a main. Inside of this main, we create a new section with a class of header. Inside of this section with the class of header, we create a new h1 that says CRUD in SVELTEKit. Now we create a new form, and the action will be to /API/create to do method post, and we say on submit is equal to it. We set a bar, and we say prevent default. We say handle create to do. We give a class of create to do form. We say input. We give it a name of content. Make sure that the name is content and not anything else. Make sure that there is no typo, because if there is, it will break your application. We say placeholder. The placeholder will be create a new to do exclamation point, and we bind the value to the input content. We create a button that is of type submit, and the button's content will just be simple text that just says create to do. So we also give it a class, call it create to do button, and below this section, create an unordered list with an s each block. We say data.todos as to-dos, and we give it a key which says to-do.id. We say li transition slide. We give it a transition of slide, and we set it to global. Inside this, we create a new div called that has the class name of list item container. This will contain two forms: a form that contains a button dot list item, and the other, let's make sure to wrap this in parentheses, will be a form that contains a button with a class of delete button. So on the form, we give it an action of /API/check to do/ to do ID. We also say the method post class. We give a class of check form. We say on submit. We make sure to prevent default. We say event handle check to do dot ID and event. Let's make sure to rename this to do. And in the button, we create a key block / key. And inside this key block, it will be keyed by the checked property, because every time the checked property changes in the to do, we want to rerun this code. So we say dot check indicator. We say in fade duration 100 and out fade absolute. And let's create that animation right now. We say function fade. We say function fade absolute. We have one property called node, which will be an HTML element. And this will return a transition config. Return duration of 100 milliseconds. And we create a CSS function, which will just return some CSS. We say position absolute and opacity T. Now let's make sure to add some content inside of this div. Now we say s if else block. So we say if the to do check property is true, we say fa check fa check square. And if it is, so if else, we say reg square. Now let's make sure to import these. Let's go up to the top and let's manually import these. So we import these from Svelte icons /fa reg square dot svelte. And we do 3 imports. We say fa check square. And for the first one, we say fa trash alt. Now let's go down. And below the key block, we just import the to-do.content. So as you can see, beside the to-do.content, we display either a check, which was a check square, which would be a square with a check mark inside, or a regular square, which would be an empty square with transparent insides. So it'll just be a border. So it'll be the border or the square next to some content. So below on this one, we say the action will be to API/API/delete to do. We say to do.id. We say method post. And we say on submit, prevent default. And we say event handle delete to do.id event. And in this button, we say on click. Now, actually, let's not create the on click listener. We just say FA trash alt. So now there's a ton of styles that it could go through, but I'm not going to go through because it will take up my whole time of this video. So we just go straight to github.com. The link to my GitHub will be straight in the description if you want to check it out. So you say src routes plus page.svelte, and we copy this. We paste. And don't worry about the errors because Svelte, I don't know why the errors pop up, but it works perfectly fine. So now if we go here, you can see that a beautiful to-do list app is created. We create a to-do, we just press enter. A to-do list expands. We could also check to see that even if we press the button, nothing creates, but if we enter some content and we press create to-do, it creates it. And we could also delete the to-do. We could toggle it. We could restart the page, and it'll keep our state because the state is kept in the server. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you found it valuable, and if you did, like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you in the next one.